my cup of coffee. And I open my cup of coffee. And I drink my cup of coffee. To take my cup of coffee, what do I need? I need a hand. Does Black Knight have a hand?
No.
No, but by using that verb, take away, he's doing what? That's exactly right. He's personifying Black Knight. Now, how are we correct? How do we know we're correct in our understanding that he's personifying Black Knight? Well, let's look at this last line. Death's second self, right? Now, just like we see this last line here, right? Bare ruined choirs is going to describe the boughs, right? So, remember, what Shakespeare does is he likes to set up a pattern and he sort of repeats that model throughout the rest of the poem, right? So let's look at this line. Death's second self. Now, let's look at this word self. Does my coffee cup have a self?
No.
No, doesn't have a self. Has a lot of coffee though. Do you have a self?
Yes.
Yeah. So now, self is something that a person has, but an object doesn't. So we already think personification, right? Now think about this. He said death's second self. So who has a self? Well, death must have a self if he has a second self, right? I have a self, and my second self also has a self, right? So, if I walk out on the street and I say, Grace, I saw your second self, Grace is going to think, what do you mean, Charles? Perhaps you mean you saw someone who looked like me, right? I saw Grace's self, a second self, walking on the streets of Beijing. Now, who looks like death? That's right. What do you look like when you are asleep?
Dead.
You look like you're dead. Right? There you go. So what Shakespeare has done is he's personified Black Knight and he's personified death, and he's saying that Black Knight resembles death, right? They maybe have a familial relationship, right? Like father to son, or brother to brother, right? Maybe one is the cousin of the other, right? So, that second self that seals up all in rest. So, who is doing the sealing up all in rest? Who seals up all in rest? What? Black Knight. Black Knight. But see how he just, by using one word, right, uses this poetic effect of personification, right? Does take away. To take something you need hands, right? So already he's anthropomorphizing, or he's giving human characteristics to non-human things, right? He's personifying, right? And then in this last line where he says, where he's further describing Black Knight, he's calling Black Knight death's second self. Well, in order to have a second self, you have to have a self. So that means death has a self, and then whatever resembles death has a self. So when you say something has a self, we've all agreed that my coffee mug, however much I might love it, doesn't have a self, right? Or however much you might love your iPhone or your BMW, it doesn't have a self, right? People do. So just that one word alone is a good way of personifying Black Night and death. All right. Any questions so far? See how easy Shakespeare is? It's incredibly easy. So let's play a game. All right, look on. Look at the title of the poem by Charles Bukowski. Now, Bukowski, he went to college for one semester and he studied journalism. But I don't think he ever read Shakespeare. However, just by looking at the title of the poem, we can kind of figure out something about the theme of the poem based upon what we know about this sonnet, right? Because the idea is here, if you study Shakespeare, and you understand him the way that we're working through him, right? Looking at the poetic devices that he uses to develop the meaning or the theme of the poem, and that these things take root in English poetry, because he's one of the poets at the beginning of the English language, and that they sort of create the world of poetry that exists in the English language. If you become familiar with these tools and these themes and these devices as they're used by Shakespeare, then when they appear later on in other poets, it gives you a sort of shortcut to understand what the other poets are trying to say, right? Or what their themes might be. So, if we look at this poem, just the title of the poem alone might give us some clue as to what it's about, based upon what we know from this poem by Shakespeare, right? So, the tragedy of the leaves. I awakened to dryness, and the ferns were dead. The potted plants, yellow as corn. So he's already giving us a color associated with plants, right? What color are the plants?
Yellow.
They're yellow. Where have we seen this relationship before? Shakespeare. So what do we know, what do we think the theme of this poem might be about? Is it going to be about being in the springtime of life and having the rest of my life before me? Is it going to be about being in the summer of my adulthood and looking back on the things I've accomplished and looking forward to still more things to accomplish? Or is it going to be about being in a state of decline and regretting all those things I didn't do? What do you think? Excuse me? Decline, right? Just based upon the imagery that he's using, right? And the way that the imagery was used in Shakespeare. So let's confirm our guess, right? Let's confirm our guess. So if you jump down near the end of the poem, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's about 13, 14 lines from the bottom where it says, he writes, I shaved carefully with an old razor the man who had once been young and said to have genius. Right? So think about this. It's an old razor. And he says, he shaves, right? The face of the man who had once been young. So he's no longer young, right? It fits right in line with the way that Shakespeare has used this imagery, right? So if you understand the way that Shakespeare uses the imagery to develop the theme of writing about what it is like to get older, right? Then you can see how easy it is to understand this poem. You have a way of interpreting this poem. If you understand Shakespeare, you can more easily interpret this poem by Charles Bukowski. Right? Okay. So now let's let's go on to the last set of 4 lines before we go on to the couplet at the end. All right, so I'm just going to read these. All right, so he starts out this next set of 4 lines. He writes, "In me thou seest the glowing of such fire." Right? Now, notice this repetition. In me thou seest. In me thou seest. Right?
Okay.
That's a rhetorical device. It's called anaphora. It's a rhetorical device where you repeat the beginning of a line, right? In me thou seest the twilight of such day, in me thou seest the glowing of such fire, right? That part where he's repeating the first part of the line, in me thou seest, that's a rhetorical device called anaphora, right? Okay, so in me thou seest the glowing of such fire. Now, again, what we've seen throughout the poem is we've seen a development of a metaphor consistently comparing stages of life to something else. For the first metaphor, the first 4 lines, it was comparing the stages of life to the seasons of the year. In the next 4 lines, it was comparing the stages of life to the stages of the day, right? So what is the metaphor in the last 4 lines? Starting with, in me thou seest. So he's comparing the stages of life to the stages of a what? That's right. So it's another light metaphor, right? It's another light metaphor, just like the light metaphor that was in the second set of 4 lines. Right? Now, given what you know about the 8 lines that came previous, do you think the fire is going to be starting out, burning bright, or going down? Going down, right? Because he sort of sets you up for that. All right, good. So that means you're paying attention and you're understanding Shakespeare. You kind of see what he's doing. So in me thou seest the glowing of such fire, that on the ashes of his youth doth lie. All right. Now the next line, as the deathbed. Now what's a deathbed?
When dead bodies lie on it.
Okay, so think about this. Where did people go when hospitals didn't exist? Well, they died at home, right? Before they had hospitals, people died at home, and they died in their bed. They took to their bed, you know? They might have taken to their bed 6 months before they died, a couple of months, a couple of weeks, a day or 2, right? And they usually died at home in bed, right? It's a deathbed. Now, who has deathbeds? Human beings have deathbeds. But he's comparing what to a deathbed?
Fire.
Well, the ashes, right? The ashes of the fire are like the deathbed, right? That's right, he's personifying. And he's also saying something about the state of the fire. If the ashes are like a deathbed, does that mean the fire is burning bright, just starting out, or about to go out?
Go out.
It's about to go out, right? That's exactly right. So, in me thou seest the glowing of such fire, that on the ashes of his youth doth lie. As. Now, that word as makes it a simile, right? So he's comparing ashes to a deathbed, right? He's using a simile. Okay. As the deathbed whereon it must expire. What is the it in that sentence? What is the it? Yeah, the it is the fire, right? That's why it's always good to keep aware, be aware of what the subject is, what the verb is, and what the object is in each line, right? You want to know what that it, that third person singular pronoun refers back to. It refers to the fire, right? So the fire is about to go out. And then he gives us a difficult line. And I'm going to put this difficult line on the board because we want to look at it. You want to take pictures of my beautiful piece of art before I erase it? All right. Okay, so what does this last line mean? Consumed by that which it was nourished by. Okay, so what's the subject? Let's start again. So what's the subject of this line?
That.
Well, look, in this line. You're right, but in this line, what's the subject?
That.
It. It is the subject. And then, of course, what does the it refer to? Fire. So this is the subject. Okay? So now, what's the verb?
Nourished.
Okay, that's one verb, right? So this is one verb. And this is another verb. Now, think about this. Consumed, what does consumed mean? How about eaten by, right? I consumed the pizza. All right, what does nourished mean?
Gave it nutrition.
Yeah, feed, right? The pizza nourished me. All right, or fed by, we could say. Now, what do you notice about these two words, consumed and nourished? They're opposites. Very good, right? These two are opposites. So I'll give you an example. Look at those two words. Darkness visible. What can we say about those two words? They're opposites, right? How can darkness be visible? Right? John Milton uses this in the famous poem, the epic poem called Paradise Lost. So he's putting two opposites side by side, right? What is it called when you put two opposites side by side to describe something? It's another rhetorical device. It's called an oxymoron. Or an oxymoron. But my ancient Greek professor at college would say, no, it's oxymoron. He went to Harvard. Maybe that's where he picked that up. All right. So something that consumes and nourishes, right? You're putting opposites side by side, right? So here Shakespeare is using this poetic device, this rhetorical device, oxymoron. right? Something that both nourishes and consumes the fire. So what is it that feeds a fire?
Oxygen.
Oxygen, yeah? All right, what else besides oxygen?
Ooze.
Wood. All right, so now think about this. You got some wood. What happens to the wood once it gets burned by the fire? Burns to ashes. So, does the wood nourish the fire, or does it consume the fire? Right, so the wood feeds the fire, right? And then as the fire burns the wood, it turns into ashes. And the ashes do what to the fire? They consume it, right? So see what Shakespeare does just in that one line, right? Okay, now, so if we think about this poem so far, would we say it's positive, or would we say it's negative?
Negative.
Yeah, it seems very sort of dark and depressing, right? I'm getting old. Oh, I'm getting older. Oh, I'm almost dead. Right? Seems pretty bad for old Shakespeare, right? But now he does something in these last two lines that kind of changes it, right? Because he set us up and he sort of followed it through. I'm getting old. I'm really getting old. I'm almost dead, right? But then let's look at these last two lines. He writes, this. What does the this refer to?
Everything they said.
That's right. Everything that preceded, right? So all these signs of my inevitable, inescapable decay and decline. In other words, the fact I'm going to die, right? This thou perceivest. Okay, so this you perceive, this you understand. The you that he's been writing to the whole time in the poem, right? This you perceive, which makes your love more strong. Okay? So you understand, you see, you perceive that I'm getting old and I'm going to die. And this makes your love more strong. So what question should we automatically think to ask ourselves after this first line? Why? How is that possible? Right? Okay, well, so this is what he says. To love that well which thou must leave ere long. Right? To love that well, to love that intensely, which you must leave before long, ere long. Before is just ere. Right? So what has Shakespeare done? He's saying, you see, you perceive, you understand that I'm going to die, right? And this makes you love me even more, right? And why does this make you love me even more? Because you know I'm not going to be here for very much longer. So what has Shakespeare done? Does it seem negative or positive at the end?
Positive.
Yeah, it seems positive. So let's think about this trick that Shakespeare has done. And this is where I'm going to give you a brief sort of introduction to existentialism, right? So, themes in existentialism have to do with this. We lose everything. What do I mean by we lose everything? I mean everything. We lose our family, we lose our friends, we lose our youth, right? We lose our possessions. And then, worst of all, what happens at the end after a lifetime of loss? What's the inevitable, inescapable end?
Death.
You're gonna die. Seems pretty dreary, right? Well, this is what the existentialists think, right? So this is sort of the diagnosis, right? We all have this in common. Now, I think Shakespeare agrees with this, right? Certainly what he seems to describe in this poem, that time of year thou mayst in me behold, right? It's about loss. He's lost his youth. Now, so that's the diagnosis. So what's the therapy? In other words, how do we treat this? Can we change the fact that we're going to lose everything? Can Shakespeare change the fact that he's getting old and he's going to die?
No.
No, he can't change it. It's inescapable, it's inevitable, it's going to happen. What is the one thing he can and does change at the end of the poem? He changes his attitude about it, right? You don't have control over any of this. You don't have control over loss. It can happen at any time, right? But you do have control over your attitude toward loss, right? That's what Shakespeare does, right? You can't change the accidents of circumstance, but you can change your attitude about the accidents of circumstance, right? That's what Shakespeare does at the end of the poem, in those last two lines, right? He says, well, you know what? This I can't escape. This I cannot change. It's going to happen anyway. However, I can reinterpret, I can change my attitude about why is it that you loved me so intensely. Ah, I know. See, I can't change this, but I can sort of reinterpret why you love me so intensely. You love me so intensely because you know I'm not going to be around very much longer, right? Now that's a radically different way of understanding getting old, right? You know, because like, some people might be like, Charles, you know, 20 years ago when you were like 22, you were a lot better looking. You mean you had long hair, you weren't so fat. But now, things just aren't looking so good for you, Charles. You're bald, you're fat. I don't think I love you so much. Shakespeare goes, no. It's because I'm not going to be around much longer that you love me so intensely. That's a radically different attitude toward getting old, right? I'm not going to be abandoned. I'm going to be loved more intensely because those people around me want to love me intensely because they know I'm not going to be around much longer. He can't change the facts, the reality, but he can change his attitude.